All right, as we've talked about before, today we start the second book, which is the Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition. And I've already mentioned this to you, but I'm going to say it again. This week, we're going to cover chapters 2, 3, and 4. All right? And there won't be a test this week just because I want you to get into the flow of doing this. All right, there will be one early next week, probably not Monday, but probably Tuesday. Maybe Monday I'll give you a pre-test or something. I don't know. But Tuesday, probably right now, plan on Tuesday being the test. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week, we'll go over chapters 5, 6, and 7. We'll kind of do it the same way. All right. And like I think I mentioned this to you before, that we've already gone over chapter 1 because it's the same chapter as the one in the HTML book. So let's just very quickly look at this. So we're going to look at two or three, really three different ways of including JavaScript in an HTML document. Then we'll look at some JavaScript syntax, how to work with data, how to work with expressions, how to use objects, methods, and properties, and the chapter ends with two different applications, which we're going to go over more again than we did in the other book. We're going to go over the miles per gallon one. We're going to go over the test scores application. So that'll be today. Then tomorrow, notice conditional expressions, basic control statements, three applications. So two of them are the same as they basically build on each other. So you're going to see for several chapters this miles per gallon and this test scores, but then they'll have a future value one. Now, notice that after that it says how to work with arrays. We are going to look at this, but not in depth and breadth of coverage till much later in the book. So you'll just be introduced to them here. All right. And then as mentioned, that on Thursday, again, this stuff is meant to be introductory stuff. So if we go through it and something doesn't totally make sense, I wouldn't really let that bother you because we're going to hit on it later in the book. All right. So on Thursday then, or Wednesday, I guess, how to use objects to work with data, how to use functions, how to handle events, and then again, two illustrative applications. That's enough to go over on this right now. Now, this morning I sent you an email, and in that email I've got three different URLs. All right. The first one is kind of what you'd expect. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through this. Either you like what W3 Schools gives to you or you don't. All right. I would definitely suggest if we start going through this and you struggle, that you take the time to go through this tutorial. Literally everything that we might want to go over in this book is in this tutorial, directly or indirectly. And there's examples up the wazoo. All right. If you don't like the way that's written or whatever, you can go out to the Mozilla Developer Network, and they've got a JavaScript tutorial. This is probably a little bit more, I was going to say not verbose, but you might find it a little harder to read. It's not that it's difficult, but you don't get the big number of examples that you get in the W3 Schools one. All right. So you've gone through both of those. You didn't like either one of them. Now, I want to mention this because this almost looks like a weird website. First, let me say a couple things about this website. It's archived, which means it is no longer supported. All right. And it's been that way for a few years. So why am I showing it to you? Because in my opinion, for whatever that is or is not worth, this is probably the best resource out there for learning JavaScript. All right. I used to use this all the time, and then boom, it was just gone. One day it was gone. No notice, no nothing. It was just gone. And I couldn't find it, and I looked for it. And a few months later, one of my students at the time said, hey, over the weekend, I was looking, and don't ask me how, but I found this, your Hunlock thing, and it was archived. So he sent me the URL, and I've been providing that to students ever since then. So when you look at this, I'm not going to read them to you, but you could start here, as you'd probably guess. But we're going to cover numbers. We're going to cover strings. We're going to cover arrays. We're going to cover functions. We will, at least on a peripheral basis, talk about JSON. We will talk about dates. And at the very end of the semester, we'll talk about Ajax. So everything that's in here, we will talk about. All right. The last thing that I brought for you or gave to you or whatever, let me grab this for you because I've got it. I think it's in my downloads folder. Yep. And that is this. Now, again, a little hard to read, but what I did a couple years ago is I went through both the Mozilla Developer Network and I went through W3 Schools, and I picked out what I considered to be the most important URLs for basically every topic we're going to go over. All right. So use that. If it can help you, great. And if you could say I could care less, that's not a problem. All right. So I'm going to jump back into the book then. And I believe I mentioned this to you before, but just on the off chance I did not, and I know I mentioned it to you before, you're gonna be tested on everything in section 1 other than chapter 1. So your first test will be on 2, 3, and 4. Your second test will be on 5, 6, and 7. All right. I'm not going to test you on 8, 9, 10, and 11. In a couple weeks, I will spend 1 or 2 class periods going over those. I'm not going to give you any written tests on chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. I'm not going to give you any homework or labs on 8, 9, 10, and 11. All right. But like I said, jQuery is still used in millions of websites, so we'll go over it. So the question might be, okay, if it's still used in millions of websites, why are you not giving us homework? Why aren't we being tested on it, etc.? Because what's happening is JavaScript itself and what's called vanilla JavaScript is so powerful, there really isn't the need for jQuery in new development anymore. All right, and that's why. Then we will go over all of section 3. All right, so you will probably, the test 3 will probably either be on 12 and 13 or 12, 13, and 14. And then your last test will be either on 14, 15, and 16 or just 15 and 16. The last week or so of class, we're going to go over this stuff, 17, 18, and 19. All right, but that's the stuff that's covered in the 3rd semester class, the AWD 1111 class, which I think has been retitled to database-driven websites. All right, so we'll talk about it just so at least you've been introduced to it. All right, so let me jump right into chapter 2 here. Okay, so I'm on page, as you can see, I'm on page 55. Now notice, the goal is to get you off to a good start with JavaScript. Everything that is mentioned in this chapter will be mentioned again in later chapters. We're going to go through the chapter, and as we go through it, I'm going to ask that you get into Visual Studio, but don't do it yet because we're just going to create about 3 simple things. First, we're just going to create a folder on our own. Then in that folder, we're going to put an index.html file, which will have a whopping 10 lines in it. All right. And then finally, we'll start to create some JavaScript. And we'll start, what we're doing, it will be very simplistic. Now, you may not think it's simplistic if you've never done this before. I always say that to say that something is simplistic is a relative term. I've had that before where people have explained stuff to me. I have definitely there have been times when I've been the dumbest person in the room. Somebody will explain something and I'm like, geez, I don't even know what the hell that is. And other people are like, yeah, whatever. All right. But even if you struggle at the beginning, I think you can all get this. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. All right. It says if you have programming experience with another language, you should be able to move rapidly through this chapter. Otherwise, take it easy and do the exercises at the end of the chapter. Well, one thing that I want to do is at the end of this chapter, I want us to take a quick look at the labs and the homeworks before the end of class today, so you have some kind of an idea of what it is you'll be working on. All right. And I'm looking at right now, since we're talking about probably next Tuesday would be your first test on 2, 3, and 4, that the written tests and the homework and the labs will be due next Monday. Now, you might say, well, that's pretty fast. Well, first of all, this lecture is probably going to take upwards of an hour, maybe a little bit more, the most 2 hours. All right, so you're going to have at least an hour and a half, almost 2 hours today to start working on this stuff. Same thing tomorrow, same thing Wednesday. Thursday will be a lab all period. Friday will be a lab all period. So you're going to get plenty of time to work on this. And all I can tell you is as you're working on it, because I'm going to show you a few things today, don't be afraid to make mistakes. All right? Really, and I'm not just saying it, consider mistakes to be a good thing. All right? Because that's where you're going to really learn. So let's first take a look at how you can include JavaScript in an HTML document. Now, don't type this in. Don't worry about this at all. But I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. So let's see. All right, I'm just going to grab this. And like I said, you don't have to worry about typing this in or anything. You all know what this is by now. This is HTML, all right? Nothing new in there. But I do want to show you something, okay? And that is this. There are 3 different ways that you can add a JavaScript file to your HTML program. And I'm going to show them to you right now. Again, they're in the book. You don't have to worry about writing it down, but I want to show you something that I'm not sure if it is in the book because it's fairly new. All right, if you remember when we talked about CSS, we said there were 3 ways that you could do CSS. If you remember that, it was inline, where you put it right inside of your HTML. We said that was probably the worst way of doing it. Then there was internal, when we used the style tag. All right, then there was external. All right, and with external, what? You put it into a different file. It's very similar right here. So in other words, I can come in here, and you're used to using h1 tags, div tags, span tags, etc. One thing you've got to get used to doing is when you use JavaScript, everything directly or indirectly goes inside of what are called script tags. And when you create a script tag, it is mandatory that you create an ending script tag. It's not a self-closing tag. All right? So if I came up in here, and again, don't worry about what this means because we're going to look at it in a minute. If I said alert, hello, just that. Okay, that's all I'm saying. What I'm showing you is I am putting JavaScript right inside of my program. All right, that's not a good way of doing it, but a lot of people do it that way. A lot of people do this more than they use the inline CSS that we talked about. This is a bad practice to get into, but a lot of people still do it. So why do they do it? Because it's easy, because you don't have to put it in another file, etc. All right, they're lazy. Everybody else does it. Yeah, but then what happens is pretty soon you start adding more and more and more and more code to it. Now you got hundreds of lines that are inside of an HTML program. All right, that's just not a good thing to do. So I'm just going to save this. All right, and I'm going to save it. I'll throw it onto my desktop. And again, I'll just call it hello.html. That's it. There's nothing special about the name or anything else. All right, and if I come back to here, there's hello.html. When I run it, notice I get that box. That's an alert. All right. And when I taught JavaScript in previous semesters, we used the alert a lot. I'm starting to get away from the alert, and I'm starting us to get used to using what's called the console. So I just quickly want to show you the difference between them. Now I'm going to keep this statement in here, so when I run the program again, you're going to see this again. All right? But what I want to show you is this. So when we brought up that file, we saw this. Well, I'm going to come in and type in console.log, and again, I'm just going to say same thing, hello. All right, so you see it in two different places. So why am I doing this? All right, because what you're finding out over time is the use of alert is kind of dwindling. People don't use it as much as they used to, but it has its place. All right, so I'm going to save this. And I'm going to run the program again. And you say, well, there it is. So where's the other one? Well, to see the other one, you have to right mouse click, go over to inspect, and then find your console window. And you'll notice there's the word hello. All right. So again, a natural thing would be, that's fine. Why do I want this? Well, it keeps a record of what you've done. Plus, when you take the class in the third semester, there is no alert statement. You have to use the console. All right. And we use the console along with Git just to show you this is one of the programs that I'm working on for the class this afternoon. This is the console. But this is using the console on the server side. What we're doing this semester, when you see this is using the console on the client side. It's on your machine. All right. So that's the first way. So again, that's the easiest way of doing it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. All right. Not really recommended, but it's not, there's nothing wrong with doing it. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to show you the other two ways. All right. The next way is kind of like using style tags. But again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this script thing. In fact, let me keep going. And I'm going to put it up here. Almost the same thing, except instead of putting it in my HTML, I put it in my head section. All right, and I'm going to save this. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to run the program again. There's hello. When I right mouse click and inspect, there's hello. So again, you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, at least we have gone to the trouble of segregating our JavaScript so it's not right in our HTML itself. It's not in the HTML body. All right? Okay, so then let's look at the third way of doing this. If you remember, again, when we did the third way of doing it, all right, for CSS, it was to put it into an external file. We're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to grab these two things right here. I'm going to copy them to the clipboard, not the script tags, but just those two things. I'm copying them to the clipboard, and I'm going to paste them in. So again, I've got this. All right. I've got this alert, and I've got this hello. I'm not sure if it'll work directly the way I'm doing it, but we'll find out real quick. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save. And again, I'll just call this script.js. Not a great name, but it'll work. And you notice alert is a keyword, so you can see that it's in brown. That's just in the IDE or the editor that I'm using. You're going to see the same kinds of stuff when we look at this in a couple minutes in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so I've got that. Now I want to come back into this file. And again, now I'm going to come in. Come on. I don't know what I did there. There it is. And I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say script source equals script.js script. All right. Now you might say, well, that's kind of confusing. You don't have to call that one script.js. We could have called it anything. It doesn't matter. And again, I'm not positive this is going to work, but we're going to look. Oh, still said hello. And when I go to inspect, there's hello. All right, now I didn't mean to waste your time, but what I have just shown you right there are the 3 different ways that you can add this to a program. All right, and they are internally or inline, putting it right inside of your HTML, internally, adding them in here, and externally. Now, we'll look at this at another time, but the order in which you put this stuff can, C-A-N, can matter. So typically, if you put this in like this, what you do is at the end here, you put in the word defer. That's actually something relatively new that might not even be in your book, but you're going to see me do it. Why? Because defer says make sure everything has been loaded and you're able to start working with it before you start running the JavaScript. This guarantees it. Otherwise, you don't have the guarantee. All right, and if I save this and run this again, you're not going to notice any difference. There's the hello, and there's the hello. But if you've got a program that has got just a boatload of, let's say, very intricate images, and it takes a while to load those, and you want to start manipulating them right away using JavaScript, the defer will be your friend doing it that way. All right, so that was the first thing. So let's just go on here. All right, the syntax, you're going to start seeing it. You've already started seeing it. Also, just so you know, as far as the syntax goes, coming back to here, you may or may not remember this, but when we worked, if you were working inside of a CSS file and you wanted to make comments, you started them with a /* and you ended them with a */. That could be a 1-line comment or a multi-line comment. Works the same way here. There's also, let's say that I wanted to put a comment right here, and I wanted it to say, for whatever reason, I wanted it to say line 1. I can do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what I just showed you. However, when putting in a single line comment, when I want everything to the right of what I put in to be a comment, all I have to put in are 2 // So the 2 // are used for a single line comment. The /*// is for a multi-line comment. All right. We're going to look here in just a minute at the primitive data types. Primitive means they're simple. They can't be broken down. They're in their simplest form. One thing I mentioned to you was that on Thursday, we were going to talk about arrays. All right. And when we do, an array is not a primitive data type. It's what's called a data structure or a complex data type. You'll start to understand the difference between them when we start to look at them. All right. How to work with expressions. We will work with expressions. I'm going to show you when we start writing some code in just a little bit, the quote old school way of doing it and the quote new school way of doing it. They both work. They're both still used. So why would you use the new school way if the old school way is just fine? Because the new school way typically results in less code. It's less problematic. And if you say, I don't know what you mean, you will when we start looking through it. All right. Then we get introduced. When it says Introduction to Objects, Methods, and Properties, it's a 2-page introduction. There is a whole chapter near the end of the book on what's called object-oriented JavaScript. Okay? But we will get into parseint and parsefloat. If you don't know this, an int is short for integer. It's a whole number. It's a number that does not have a decimal place. Now, if I'm using parseint and if I put in pi 3.14159, I don't know any more digits than that. If you do, good for you. But the point is, if I use parse int on 3.14159, it gives me the 3. It throws away any decimal place. All right. And with parse float, it keeps it. Floating point in some languages is known as a real number, but it retains the decimal part of it. All right. The write method, we'll look at it. Document.write isn't used that much. We're going to learn much better ways, but you can use document write to actually write to a web page from using JavaScript, but it's not used that often. The toFixed, well, let's assume that I want to do this miles per gallon program that's at the end of the chapter. And every time, so if I put in 300 miles and I drove 17 miles or 17 gallons, so I come in here and I say, okay, I drove 300 miles and I used 17 gallons of gas. I don't want that answer. I want 17.65. Does that make sense to everybody? I want it to 2 decimal places, and with that second one, round up as necessary. All right, that's what toFixed does. Okay, so you're going to see all of that stuff. Then again, we will end the chapter by going over these 2 applications. All right, so let's just continue on then. So how to use the script? Again, kind of what I just showed you. Now, just so you see this, because I didn't show it to you. If you look in here, they talk about this type attribute. I'm on the top of page 57. You very rarely in new code development see people put that in. Guess what? There was one for CSS. And it was type, the same kind of thing. But you say type equals text/CSS. It's what's known as a MIME type. You say it's, and I don't mean the mimes like the people, that you see with the hats on and whatever, trying to get out of a box. No. It's a multimedia internet something or other extension. All right. And you don't have to worry about it because basically it's the default. If you want to put in type equal text like that, you can do it. It doesn't hurt anything, but it's redundant to do it. The source is what I mentioned. Now, I didn't show you this before, but typically what we would do, and if you look up, please look up on the screen here, is let's suppose I'm just going to type in this thing. I'm going to make this called first. It's going to be our first program. Typically what we should have done, and I'm just going to copy this in because I think it's still open, and I'm going to copy this in because it's probably still open. Now, what I want you to get used to doing in here, we talked about this before, is have a JS folder, and I want you to put your JavaScript in there. Does that make sense to everyone? So when I come back and open this file up again, now I will have to change this to JS/script.js. I just want you to get used to that right from the get-go because it's a better thing to do. We are providing some kind of organization for our code. All right, and again, I mentioned this to you earlier, but if you look up on the screen here, this is what I'm working on with the second-year students right now. And if you look here, what do we have? Well, we've got a file called controllers, and inside we've got a file called titlescontroller.js. We've got a file called models, and inside we've got a file called titlemodels.js. All right, if you look in node modules, there's a bunch of other folders in there, and those folders have got stuff in there. So you can see there's some organization where we're putting in and adding to the project. And that's what I want you to be doing, like I said, from day one. So you can look through these examples, but I don't think there's anything in here that I haven't told you. They say you can create an external JavaScript file. Already showed you that. You can use the script inside of your HTML page. That's called embedded JavaScript. All right, and I showed you the difference between it being basically inline and being internal. So you've already seen that stuff. There has been debate over the years before this defer tag, just so you know this, before they came up with that defer tag that I just showed you. then you literally, and you can look it up if you think I'm not telling you the truth, people argued over whether to take this, basically putting in the external tag, and should you put it here or should you put it right here before your body? Because the head loads first, then the body loads. That was the other way of trying to make sure that everything was loaded before you actually put that in. Some people still do it like that today, but the recommendation today is to use the defer tag instead. All right. Now, how to use the no script element? Virtually every computer that's sold today is JavaScript enabled, meaning that you can use JavaScript with it. And I don't care if it's a mainframe, mid-range, PC, whatever. You can use JavaScript with it. But it is possible, for example, you can go in through Chrome and you can turn JavaScript off. All right, you might say, well, why would I ever want to turn JavaScript off? You probably wouldn't, but let's assume that you're testing your program and you want to test to see if somebody has JavaScript turned off. So you might turn yours off to see if the code that you put in your no script actually runs. So no script, that code will only run if it determines that the machine you're trying to run it on does not have JavaScript enabled. I didn't say loaded, I said enabled. So if it's been disabled, it's going to say this and this. And if it's not disabled, it's going to skip that stuff and do the rest of it. And they show the difference between this and there it is with JavaScript disabled. They show you how to disable this in Chrome. Personally, I don't see in this class why you'll have any reason to do that. If you want to do it, give it a try. All right? You might be surprised at how a lot of stuff won't work when you do that. All right. So how to code JavaScript statements. As it says, the next figure summarizes how to do these. Now, they went in and they jumped into something that's unbelievably complex here. But what I want to do is just break down a few things. All right. First of all, and you're not going to see this for several weeks, using this operator right here, that thing, it's called the fat arrow. It's an equal sign followed by a greater than sign. And you cannot have any blank spaces between the equal sign and the greater than sign. All right. And it allows you to create what are called arrow functions. Do you have to worry about those? Not at all. In the last chapter that we'll talk about at the end of the semester, I think it's chapter 19, that's when they introduced these. Why they use this flippant example to do this, I don't have a clue. But they did, and that's okay. All right. Now, one concept that you're going to have to get in your head right away is what's known as a variable. All right. So I'm just going to go back to our code that we had here, and I'm going to introduce a variable to you. So let me get rid of this and this. Sure, I'll save that. All right, I'm going to get rid of that. Sure, I'll save that too. All right, but I want to get back into this one that we were using before, right there. All right, so I'm going to bring up this. I don't even need to bring up the hello. I'll bring up my JavaScript file. And there's nothing wrong in there with saying hello. It's fine. We're going to pretend for just a second. This is a dumb thing to pretend, but you'll get it anyway. Let's pretend that every one of you I just referred to as student. Okay? So I'm going to say let name equal student. All right? Now, rather than just saying hello like this, I'm going to show you this, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm going to write this 4 different ways. All right, and I'm going to show you the old school way of doing it and the new school way of doing it. All right, the old school way was you wrote this, and just so you know, because I'm sure I'll forget to tell you, so I'm telling you now, and JavaScript doesn't care when you're putting stuff in quotes if you use single quotes or double quotes. I would recommend you pick one or the other and stick with them. It's going to make your life easier. Now, a lot of times I'll just use double quotes because in most other programming languages that are not named JavaScript, your strings must be in double quotes. All right, but in JavaScript, they can be in either single quotes or double quotes. So if I say hello, and I'm going to put a blank space in there, you'll know why in a minute. But if I come in here and I say plus name, that's going to print out on the screen in an alert box, hello student. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. The new school way of doing it, if you look up on your keyboard and you look at your numbers that are up on the top of the keyboard, go all the way to the left, to the left of the number 1. You see what's called a backtick. All right, so I'm going to say here hello, and it looks a little weird, and then this. That's going to print the same thing. It also makes this gray. There might be a way to turn it off. I've never tried. All right, but this is using what's called a templated literal. Now, just pretend for a second that I did this. I'm going to get rid of it right away, but I'm going to say here, let first name equals Jeffrey. Let middle name equal Paul. Let last name equal Scott. All right? If I do it this way with an alert, if I do it that way, then I've got to come through here and I've got to write this. Hello plus first name plus a blank space plus middle name plus a blank space plus last name. And that will print on the screen, hello, Jeffrey Paul Scott. Probably thought that's what it would do, and that is what it would do. All right? So I'm going to leave that there, but let's look at doing it the other way. So I'm going to change this to backticks. Oops. So here and here. Now I can do this. Oops. Now, I may or may not have convinced you why the new way is easier. All right, and you might say it's harder. If it's harder, use the old way. You're not hurting my feelings by doing that. I'm just telling you that the use of templated literals, and what's a templated literal? It says inside of backticks, you start it with a $sign and you put the name of your variable in curly braces. And then when it runs, it replaces that with its actual value. So you can do it either way. All right? And you can do it like that in here or again with the console log. So I can come in here and say, put my blank space in again, so plus name, or I can do it with the backticks. All right? And if I save this and run it again, that might be a good thing. I'm going to go to inspect. I might have an error in here, and that's actually good. There you go. Missing a curly brace. That's the other thing console does for you, is it helps you debug your program. So it says in line 4, I'm missing a curly brace. Well, let's look. So that's right here. Yep, I didn't put that in. Now, I like to say, yeah, I did that on purpose to just show you guys. No, I screwed up. But the system found it for me, which I think is a nice thing. So I can come back here now and run this again. And maybe it still doesn't like something. Missing parenthesis after argument list in line 6. Didn't put in the end of my templated literal right there. All right. Try it one more time. And finally, I'm getting something. So hello, student. Hello, student. Hello, Jeffrey Paul Scott. Hello, Jeffrey Paul Scott. And if I come down and look in here, there's hello, student. Hello, student. I don't think I wrote those out to console log. And that's why you're not seeing the other ones. All right. Now, I'm throwing a bunch of stuff at you, and I get that. And you might think it makes very little sense. I will tell you what, and sorry if I sound like, pardon my French, but I sound like a prick. I don't really care anymore. If you don't read the book, screw you. Because if you don't read the book, you're not going to be able to get this stuff. It's not going to make sense. You should read the book, and you should try different things on your own. And if you don't do that, you're going to do nothing but struggle. All right. And I will tell you, Angie is willing to come in here and she did very well in the JavaScript portion of the class. So if you need help, when we get to that point. All right. Now, JavaScript is case sensitive. What does that mean? Well, if you look at this, and this is one of the things that's bad about JavaScript. If I come in here, see this name right here? If I come through here and I make this one a capital one, all right, just that one, I'm going to make a capital N. See that? All right, let's see what happens. So I come back here, I run the program again. Says hello student, says hello student. Well, what do I get down here? All right, name is not defined. That's actually a good thing that it showed that. All right. JavaScript is a very forgiving language. You might say, well, that wasn't very forgiving. No, but just so you know, there's another word you can use instead of the word let in here. Now, I'm showing it to you. You are never, ever allowed to use this word. You'll get points taken off. But if I come in here and say var, that allows you to be really bad with your name. All right. It allows you to, for lack of better words, break some rules. Let doesn't allow you to break rules. Var is the old-fashioned way of doing it. Let is the new way. And that said, new meaning the last 5 or 6 years. All right. And it's just the right way of doing it. So, if I change that back, boom, it works again. All right. So each JavaScript statement ends with a semicolon. Here's one of the places where I say JavaScript is, for lack of better words, can be thought of as kind of a piss poor language. And that is, if I do this, I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to do this. But if I do this, so I've removed every semicolon from here. You can see it. They're all gone. And I go back and I run the program again. Well, look, hello student, hello Jeffrey Paul Scott twice, and they're all there. Because JavaScript, if you leave off a semicolon where it expects one, almost 100% of the time, it puts in what's called an implied semicolon. So it puts it in for you. All right. And one of the reasons that JavaScript is a very good language to learn first is the same reason that it's not a good language to learn first. And that is, if you forget to do things, it typically does them for you. It's one of the very, very few languages that do that. Most languages, if you screw up, guess what? You screwed up. All right. Now, it says here, JavaScript ignores extra white space within statements. Well, what the heck does that mean? In very many ways, if you don't have something in double quotes or single quotes or backticks, so like this, that's totally legit. Kind of like the way that it worked in HTML. All right, that would work just fine the way it is. But you don't do this, because you're in the middle of a string. and it confuses the system as to what you're doing. When JavaScript is in strict mode, it disallows certain things from happening that are considered unsafe. How do you put it into strict mode? Well, at the top of your program, you type in, I think it's all in the quotes, using strict. I think it's like that. See if they show it in the book here. We're going to see it. It's going to be in one of the programs. All right, so if I'm wrong, I'll go back and change that. All right, here's ways you can split stuff over multiple lines. All right, you're going to see that. That doesn't pay to go over it right now. A statement, as it says, yeah, it's similar to Java. Since you don't know Java, that probably doesn't mean much to you. All right, white space pretty much is the same way that white space was in HTML. Notice in some cases, Java will try to correct what it thinks is a missing semicolon. Typically, that's called an implied semicolon, but it's not good practice to do that. All right. Strict mode can help you write cleaner code. Yeah, that's true. So, identifiers. What's an identifier? It's something that you make. It's something you create. So, let's say that going back to this program right here, all right, and let's say I wanted to create another variable that I called, well, you kind of see it right here, in fact. I don't even have to do that. See this? First name, how I ran two words together, that's referred to as Camel Casing. Some books will do it like this. That's usually referred to as snake casing. All right, either way will work just fine, but I would recommend just doing it that way because you see it most of the time like that when you run stuff together. Now, I'm going to tell you something you're probably not going to know what it is, and it's okay. All right, if I come through here and write what's called a function, which we'll get to in a few days, and let's just say I wanted to write a function and I wanted to call it calculate taxes. I would do it like this, and then I would have some code in here. I don't care what it is. And then I would end it. But you can see it's set up the same way that a variable is, but as far as running words together. The only way that I can tell that this is a function as opposed to a variable is it has parentheses after it. All right? Now, one thing we won't get to till almost the end of the semester is something called a class. So if I had a class that was called calculate taxes, I'd say, whoops, class calculate taxes. That's about the only time you start something with a capital letter in this language. Can you break the rules? Yes. People break them all the time. Don't. It makes it easier for someone who may end up maintaining your code later if you write and put stuff in the way that other people do it. All right, so a couple things about these. There's the reserved words in JavaScript. I'm not going to read them off to you. There's somewhere around 60 of these words. That means they all have a specific meaning for JavaScript. And they got to be used in that way. All right, look at, notice is recommending naming conventions. Use meaningful names. Yeah, I could have called that FN for first name, MN for middle name, etc. But it's much easier, even though it's a little more typing, to give stuff descriptive names. All right, and those things that I was showing you, all right, that's a variable, that's a variable, that's a variable, and that's a variable. They're all variables. So what's a variable? Basically, it's something that you put in a program whose value can vary while the program's running. All right, you can. Now, there's another thing that we haven't looked at yet, and it's called a constant. To create a constant, you start with the word const. So, and typically, you put these in uppercase. Somebody tell me, what am I going to set that equal to? That would make sense to me. So now, instead of using 12 all the time, I can use inches in a foot. You use constants, that's not a great example, but you use constants because they make the program more self-documenting. Plus, if I had this, whoops, let's just assume for a second that I'm writing a really complex program. All right, and I've got a variable here that I called federal tax rate. And I set it equal to 0.35, to 35%. And I'm using it in hundreds of places in my program. Well, it just changed to 36. So I change it one time, I recompile the program, and it changes it to every single instance that's in there. Plus, again, I can tell when I'm using it exactly what that value means. All right, so you should get used to using constants. All right. So identifiers are names you give to your variables, your functions, etc. Camel casing, I showed you. Snake casing, they don't agree with what I said, so I'm going to go back and use what they said. So for snake casing, I said that it's like if you came in here and did this, but that probably is illegal. You probably have to do it like that with no underscore. That's true snake casing. All right, go for a couple more minutes, so we're taking a break. Comments I've already shown you. Again, multi-line comment, single line comment. Now, I'm going to show you something. It's not a gee whiz type of thing, but just so you see this. All right, so I'm going to come in into Visual Studio Code. This is a program, like I said, I'm doing for the other class, so don't worry about it, okay? But let's assume for a second I wanted to take all of this code right there, and I wanted to comment every bit of it out. You now know how to do that. I could go through at the beginning of each line, and I could go // every single line. Or I could come up here and put a /*, and down here put a */. A very fast way to comment, just so you know this, in Visual Studio Code is to highlight everything you want commented, like this. Try it again. So highlight it all, hold down on your control key, and tap your /, and then it comments all that out at one time. And you do it again, and it uncomments it. All right? Use comments to describe portions of code that are hard to understand. My litmus test is if you have to ask whether or not it needs a comment, it probably needs a comment. Don't put comments in like if you say a variable equals the variable name plus 1. Don't put a comment in that says we are now adding 1 to the variable. That's just silly. All right. Again, during testing, you can use comments to comment stuff out or in as need be. All right. This is a good place to stop. Let's come back, please, at 9:10, and we'll pick it up on page 66, how to work with data.